Social connection is everything. In a way, it's an antidote sometimes to these really difficult and distressing experiences. Social disconnection leaves men even more isolated, withdrawn, and struggling to find a sense of connection and purpose in the world.
So I was really noticing that again and again, in terms of triggers for suicidality or mental health decline in men, relationship breakdown was a really, big risk factor that was just always coming up.
Social connection is really important for men's mental health, and our social relationships are really, from a young age, what defines what it means to be a man. But as we see, as men get older, their social circles get smaller, it can become harder to make those connections.
For myself personally, I joined the Center for Suicide Prevention about 4 years ago. I recognized how many of my buddies are struggling out there. These are individuals that are trying to climb the corporate ladder, that are trying to go back to complete their schooling or whatever it may be. They're struggling with their mental health, and after grabbing a coffee with some of them, it was easy to recognize and ask them that they were even having thoughts of suicide.
Having a strong social circle and being able to rely on peers can be really valuable. But we know it's not quite that simple because developing those strong connections can be challenging. There's some fear that's associated with that, especially when you're talking about mental health challenges and the degree of vulnerability that one might have to express when they're asking for help. Guys don't know how someone else is going to respond necessarily, whether they're going to be ridiculed for that or whether they're going to be genuinely open to listening and helping them.
Anxiety is an interesting one too because it can be adaptive in a lot of contexts. It's what allows us to study for that exam or push a bit harder in a game. It's an important strategy and sometimes a strength. But I think where it starts to get a little bit more maladaptive is where it impacts functioning, when there's a loss of control of these symptoms, when it starts to impact men's ability to be able to connect with others or go into situations that might be challenging for them. It can be debilitating in that way.
The biggest barrier that we often find is they're really scared what the result is going to be when they offer that help. When I start that conversation and say, "What's going on? Is everything okay?" I think a lot of men at that point are afraid of the result of that answer. What if they're not doing okay? What do I say then? How do I make this less awkward? That's the step that a lot of men say is the most difficult. It is incredibly difficult to keep that conversation going. We want to change the conversation to a sports game, a different movie, a different TV show. But in reality, it's about keeping that conversation going, living with that awkwardness for a moment, because at the end of the day, you're supporting a buddy and you're able to actually give them the resources they need.
Relationship breakdown can be both the cause and consequence of men's mental health issues and suicide risk. So a lot of the research in the area typically assumes that, mental health issues and suicide risk comes after relationship breakdown, where the emotional upheaval and loss of social support, loss of, intimacy, it's such a big stressor that it can really predispose suicide risk. But equally, on the other hand, men with pre-existing mental health issues who are in relationships, trying to cope and navigate the stresses of a mental health issue can really strain the functioning of the relationship, particularly if one partner is relying on the other as a kind of primary source of emotional support.
This kind of traditional idea of men's lifestyles, focusing on work and focusing on their intimate partner relationship, they can have value, but it can also be a risk for their mental health if we incorporate our whole identity within that. So in terms of men's relationship, if they focus so much on their family and their social circles start to dissipate as they get older, if something ends up happening in that relationship, maybe that's a distressed relationship or it ends in a breakup, it's important to have a fallback that you can rely on some people around you. And so that's a real risk that if there's no one there, that's when things start to spiral and men start experiencing those issues of social isolation.
Some people might assume that for some men they're going along okay and then all of a sudden there's a breakup and their mental health completely suffers. And for some men that is the case. But I think for others, people can start to recognize that their relationship is declining, and that can come with mental health impacts, potentially long, some months or years before the relationship actually ends.
You don't have to have a conversation about mental health and suicide all the time. It's instead, how do you connect with one another following that conversation? Is it something like exercising together, or is it building projects together, or hosting a games night? Doing something fun, using your hands where you don't necessarily have to make that eye contact, or where you don't necessarily have to be that intimate, but instead you're there, you're close with each other, and if something comes up, being equipped to have that conversation and then bringing that person to supports and resources. A lot of men struggle with helping their buddy because they don't know how to solve their issues, how to help them, and how to get them to the proper spot. But at the end of the day, you don't need to solve their issues. What you're trying to do is connecting them to resources.
But I think it's also about being able to develop resources that actually talks to men's experiences, to be able to understand anxiety and identify it in themselves, and hopefully to inspire them to talk to other people, to normalise help seeking, both through friends and family and through professional services if they need it.
So if we can start getting guys to connect online, or even providing resources to help them connect in their day-to-day life, the digital medium provides a really important avenue for peer support. Peer-based digital interventions for men really have two important components to me. The first being that digital aspect as one of the initial avenues that many men go down when they're starting to look for help. Just like if you're looking how long to cook a steak for on the barbecue, the first thing you're gonna do is go online. Same with mental health. It's often the first resource that people find and that they seek. So having something there that is specific to men is a great first step. And then the peer-based connects in there because reaching out to men with similar experiences can be incredibly valuable. And we know, especially since the pandemic, with increased loneliness and social isolation, going online, connecting with people is a really important way to socialize these days.
There's a real lack of interventions in this space that strength-based and aiming to kind of promote men's strengths and the positive qualities as they adjust to relationship breakdown. So if I'm able to find, that things like problematic coping are the things that exacerbate men's risk of suicide following relationship breakdown, then I think those could be really viable targets for interventions. For example, to say, hey, we might not be able to prevent the relationship breakup itself, but if we can target these other elements that might be exacerbating the risk, then we can definitely, try to keep men safe.
So I think a lot of the focus around men's peer support for mental health so far has really been about getting men to reach out or getting people to check in with each other. This idea of are you okay and Bell Lux Talk Day, it's important because it raises awareness for mental health, but I think there's probably more complexities to these interactions than we're really giving credit. And some of the guys that we've talked to have really expressed that they're quite planned and they're quite purposeful and calculated in the interactions that they have. There's more to it than just asking. They need to make sure they're in the right setting. They need to make sure that it's a relatively safe space that the person's going to be willing to open up. They need to navigate those resistances and the language that men use around mental health. It can be sometimes hard to find the words to express ourselves, and so you need to read between the lines to determine what's really going on with the person that you're talking to. And after all is said and done, the person providing peer support still needs to make a decision around what the next step is. Do you encourage that person to get more help? Do you follow up with them yourself? What are some benefits and pathways that you can provide to this person?